Okay, everybody, welcome back. We're going to talk timelines today, and timelines are like alarms on steroids. And so what's cool about this is you can basically create any number of different timelines that allow you to set certain events throughout the game based on timing, okay? And it's just a lot easier to work with than to simply set a series of alarm events and actions and chain them together. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our duck and our duck target appear at various moments during the game, and we're going to loop it. And for added bonus, free of charge, it's going to speed up as we go by 10% every time it loops. Okay, yes, that's right. And no extra charge. We're going to have items randomly appear. So we need to go ahead and open up GameMaker Studio, get our project, make sure everything's up to date on Git. I am now currently on what's called the development branch. And so I've created this branch right here. And so I did this git checkout-b development so I can work on it. In some of my tutorials, I think I already have the development branch, but that's where I did it. I've checked it out. So I typed, basically when I checked it out here, I checked it out. So I'm on the development branch. Here's my game. I'm just going to skip that. And we're going to take a look at our room, our objects. You notice we have an object score was the last thing we did. And so what we want to do is we want to add a timeline. And a timeline is its own kind of resource. So it's like a sprite or object or a room or a font or whatever, where you just go over here and you create a timeline. Hold down the Alt key and type T, and that creates your timeline. And we're going to set this timeline based on the room where we're going to set it. So we're going to call it timeline, room, and I think room is called room main. What did I call it? Room 0, well that's just lame. We're going to rename that room right now, and hopefully we won't cause too much trouble. We'll call it room main. I'm pretty sure the rest of my tutorials, if I was doing it, probably called it room main as well. So notice we want to sort of link the timeline to the room just by its name. All right, this creates our initial timeline, okay? Now, timelines have different game time moments, and so what we do is we add moments. We can have a description. We're just going to click on add, and our first moment in game time is going to be not at 0. By the way, 0 is at what frame of the video, and so, or of the game. Frame 0 is the very beginning when it first appears. We're not going to have our duck appear for at least 75 frames, okay? So which is going to be about 1.5 seconds or so, something like that. So what we're going to do is instead of 0, we're going to change the moment, which is when we want to trigger our first event. So instead of 0, we're going to type in 75, okay? So at 75, something is going to happen. That's called moment75.gml. Okay, so what's going to happen at 75? Well, we're going to create a duck. Okay, so let's go ahead and create an instance of the duck. I've recently used it, so it pops up on under my recently used. Now, my recommendation is when you choose an object, you could try just typing in the name of the object, and if you know the names of your objects, that's great. But I always find it easier just to click select a resource, that little clipboard, and go there. So there's our object duck. Okay, I don't see my object duck target. I'm going to need to add that in a moment. For now, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so when we create our instance of the object, we need to set it in the room. We have a couple options here. Number 1, we're going to start with we're going to have it randomly appear from left to right on the screen right about the top of the water. Okay. So if we want it to randomly appear, we're going to use a function called iRandom. iRandom selects a random whole number. I stands for integer. So we're going to do a random integer between 0 and our number. Now, the width of the screen is 1024. So I could do 1024, but we have a problem with that. Number 1, if it picks 0, our duck is going to appear half off of the screen, half on the screen on the left-hand side. If it picks 1024, it's going to do the same thing on the right-hand side. And it's random, but it could happen. So we don't want it to appear right at the edge of the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple things. Number one, we're going to add 100 to that number. So if it picks 0, we'll add 100 to 0, so it'll actually be 100 pixels from the left-hand side. However, if it picks 1024 and it adds 100, it's going to be 1124. It's going to be 100 pixels off the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 200 from this number. So instead, we're going to put irandom 824 plus 100. So the lowest it could possibly be would be 100, and the highest it could possibly be would be 924, giving us a padding of 100 pixels on the left or the right. Now on the Y, we have two options. If we do not check relative, we're saying where on the entire screen it appears. So we have two options here. We could leave these unchecked, in which case Y needs to be 595, okay, which is roughly the top of the water. However, if you didn't know that number and you wanted to do it a little differently, you could actually check relative and type 0. And what that would mean is it would mean the up and down position of relative to wherever the object that has this timeline happens to be. So what we could do is we could take the object and put it right where we want it to appear. Now I don't like that because I might use this in other ways. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 595 after all that talk. But I just wanted to show you that the relative, you can actually take advantage of it at various times. We're going to leave target and temp alone. Don't even know what that means. All right, I'll come back later when I need it and I'll deal with it. So at 75, it's going to create object duck. Now what I want to do is I want to attach this timeline to an actual object. And so I'm going to go back to my little window here, and we're going to create our own original object that's going to control the timeline. We're going to call it controller. So we're going to right click on objects, create the object, and title it object underscore controller. We do not need a sprite. And it's checked visible. Now, if you wanted to add a little sprite so you could see where you're placing the object controller, that would make sense. But if you did that, make sure you would uncheck the visible box. I'm just going to leave it invisible, I'm going to leave it visible, but no sprite. I'm going to click on Add Event, and it's the Create event. So basically, when the object controller first appears in the room, okay, we want it to trigger a timeline. So I'm going to click Create, and on Create, I want it to set the timeline. So, in order to do that, I need to figure out how do I set the timeline. Well, this is an action. Okay, the event is create, so the action has to do with the timeline. So I'm just going to type in here timeline and see what options I have. Under timelines, we have set instance timeline, we have set timeline movement, we have set timeline speed, and we have set timeline state. So what we're going to do is we're going to use instance timeline. We're going to drag it out. And by the way, we're on the object controller. It doesn't know what timeline we want to use. So we're going to grab timeline here. I'm just going to use it, select it, so I don't have to remember how I spelled it. And I'm not only going to start it, but I'm going to loop it. Okay? By looping it, that means it will just happen over and over again. Every about a second and a half, a new duck will appear. Okay? So again, it's the, let's go back to the controller object itself. Object controller, on create, start timeline, and we set it over here. So that's what that should look like. You may want to take a screen capture of that to make sure you got it. Put it in your notebooks or whatever if you want to remember that. Anyways, that's how it's going. Let's go ahead and add this object into the room. You have to add it to the room for this to work. So I go to the room editor, I open up this little window here, and I drag object controller out. Now remember I told you you could put it like on a location. If I put it right here, for example, and I set a Y relative of 0, it would appear on the vertical position of where that object actually is. So that's why I mentioned that you could set it that way. I'm not going to, but let's go ahead and run it. To test this out, let's go ahead and delete our other object ducks. We don't need those anymore. That was just there for testing. Okay, so now we get rid of those. So now we can test our new object controller. Let's go ahead and run it, and let's save our changes anyway, and we'll run it and see if it works. It shouldn't appear right away. It should appear about a second and a half in. Wait, we wait, we wait. There it is. All right, it appeared. And I click it, and I got a score. It appears again. Now we know it's looping, and see how it's appearing at random locations. So that works, but let's expand this a little bit, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna change our timeline a little bit. We're gonna add another moment and add another duck. And then we need an object duck target, which I'm gonna need to add because I think I must have missed that or somehow deleted it at some point. But watch this. So I already have this moment in time that creates an object duck. It sets all these settings, and this took me a while to write all this out. And that would be kind of a pain to have to write it again. So guess what I have? I can right click on my moment and I can duplicate it, Control D. And now it's set to 76. Oh, interesting. When I duplicated it, it did not include the create instance. So I'm just gonna right click and copy that instead. Go over to moment 76, paste it in, and then I need to go back. And let me just double click on the timeline again. I hate it when it does that. And I'm going to change the moment in time. So I'm going to change this moment. I think I set it to 150. I think it's going to be a little bit later. So at 150, it's going to add the object duck. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I covered in my previous tutorial creating the object duck target, but I'm going to pause the video, create it, and then we'll come back. And on the next moment in time, at about 225, then we'll add duck target, we'll test it out, and then on 300, we're actually gonna speed up the timeline so that they start appearing faster. That's always a fun thing to do. Okay, so I've re-added in duck target, which now has a score of 50. So I have my extra duck. So now I'm gonna go back to my timeline, and I'm gonna create a new game moment. And check this out. I am going to copy this create duck object duck. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to add a new one. And I'm going to change the moment to 225. Okay. And then I'm just going to right click on 225 and paste that. But I'm going to change it. It's not going to be object duck. It's going to be object duck target, which is harder to hit. So create one duck. Create another duck, create a duck target. All right, let's go ahead. I'm gonna add one more piece and then we'll test it. Actually, let's go ahead and test this at this point. Save my changes, run it, see if duck target appears on the third appearance. Here we go. Duck. You know, we should have a goose on the third one.
It works.
There it is, duck target. Okay, it's looping, so we come back to the next one. Okay, great. So now here comes the fun part. What we want to do is 75 more frames later, we're going to speed it up by 10%. So we're going to add a new moment, and we're going to change the moment in time, Control E by the way. We're going to type in 300, and now what's going to happen is at moment 300, check this out. You're going to love this. At least I do. I type in timeline, and it's the one that set timeline speed. So I drag that over, and I'm going to change it from 0 to 0.1, and I'm going to check relative. Really important that you check relative. If you didn't, then it would set the speed to 0.1, and it would be a tenth of the speed it was before. It would take forever. It would be the most boring game. All right. Instead, we check relative, so now it's going to be a speed of 1.1 and then 1.2. It's just going to speed up by 10% all the time. Okay. So let's go ahead and run it and see how it's going. So I save my changes, and then I run it. And this is going to take a while for the video to go, but let's see if you can sort of determine. How about I just let it run for a little bit. I'll click a few ducks, get a couple points here, and then, oops, I forgot to click that. All right, 70 points, that's not bad at all. There's another duck. Okay, so I'm gonna pause the video. I'm at 80 points, and then I'm gonna come back after it's sped up. Okay, at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and show you this because one of the things that's interesting is we have 3 ducks on the screen at once because of how fast it's going. All right, so you get the idea. So this is actually working, it's speeding up, everything worked. Okay, so we're good. All right, so I think our next step is probably to either add more objects or deal with a scoring mechanic and a game over mechanic. We're really close to being done here. We're almost done. So thanks for watching. I'm going to go ahead and before I leave, let's just commit the changes I've done. First thing you always want to do after testing is save and commit. Okay, so I'm going to type a git status, and you see all the things I've added. I'm going to type a git add dot, git commit dash m, adding timeline and duck target. And now I have that there. I'm going to push this to my origin, the online repository. So I do a git push origin, that's the online repository, and then I have to do the branch I'm currently on to get those changes through. Type in my passphrase. Bam, there we go. All right, pushed all my changes through. I am up to date. Git status should say nothing. I'm ready to exit. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next video tutorial.